This is the local pub, and when we came to live here, way back at the beginning of the 1970s, we discovered that there were 3 old men still in the village, then in their 80s, who were alive at the time of the First World War, and 2 of them had been to the trenches. And I hadn't been here more than 6 months really, and I met one of them in the pub here, Wilf Ellis, he was called. And I simply said to him, well, Wilf, I gather you in the First World War, what regiment were you in? And he didn't really answer my question, he just said, I was there with horses. And then he started talking, and his wife told me later he never talked about it before. I have no idea why he told me, I hardly knew the man. I have this feeling that he was passing something on. So there's a very, very strong bond between this village and this story, because the story came genuinely from here. There was a horse sale, I learnt, of the horses on the village green out there in 1914. And many, many men went from the village, 7 of them never came back, on the war memorial there. So there's this whole weaving back into the history of the place, which for me was very powerful, because it's really hard when you're thinking about the First World War on the huge, huge numbers of horses and men who went there and didn't come back. These were individuals, you know, they were mother's sons. And they were young foals that grew up on farms, and I wanted anyway at some stage to write about this war. I'd never found a way of doing it. And he told it to me without poetic overtones. It wasn't part of a created story, this was him telling me. And it was very powerful, and I didn't know how to tell it. And then this whole notion of telling it through the eyes of a horse, the mind of a horse, the life of a horse, came to me because of what he'd said about being there with horses. So I rang up the Imperial War Museum and I just asked them the question, do you happen to know how many horses went from this country in the First World War? They said, well, we don't have an accurate record, but we think it was about 1 million. So I said, and how many came back at the end of the war? Oh, he said, that we do know, we have an exact record of it, 65,000. That's roughly the same loss rate as the men. So they fought side by side, on both sides. That was important to me.